Hello, and welcome back to Creepy Chronicles. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy Creepy Chronicles filled with spine-chilling horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, I still do not know how to explain what happened to me last night. I've been sitting in the same chair for more than an hour, staring at my hands, trying to tell myself there must be some normal reason for everything I saw. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I fell asleep on the train and my mind turned a bad memory into a nightmare. Maybe grief can make a person see things that are not there. I keep repeating these things, but none of them explain the ticket in my pocket. None of them explain the photograph. None of them explain the place where I woke up, a station I cannot find on any map, in any metro list, or in any old city record I have searched so far. I am writing this down because I need someone else to read it. I need to know whether anyone has heard of this place before. I need to know if I am losing my mind or if there are other people who have ended up there and somehow came back. The station was called Ambience Station. I had never heard that name before last night. Now it feels like the word has been carved into the inside of my skull. The night began like any other late work night. I had stayed at the office too long again. That had become normal for me over the past few months. After the accident, home did not feel like home anymore. It was just a place with too much silence and too many objects that reminded me of people who were gone. My wife's mug still sat in the kitchen cabinet because I could not make myself move it. Clara's small shoes were still by the door because some weak part of me kept thinking that moving them would make everything final. So I worked late whenever I could. I let the office lights burn my eyes. I let emails and reports fill the hours. I let myself become too tired to think. By the time I finally left the building, it was after midnight. The city outside felt empty and cold. Not quiet in a peaceful way, but quiet in the way a hospital hallway is quiet at night. The streets had that tired look they get after the last crowds have gone home. A few cars passed. Their tires whispered over wet roads. The wind moved loose paper along the curb. Storefronts were dark, and the signs that were still lit flickered like they were fighting to stay alive. I reached the metro platform at 12:12 a.m. I remember the time clearly because I looked at my phone and felt that small, tired shock that comes when you realize how late it is. The platform was almost empty. A man in a gray coat stood near the far wall, his head bent over his phone. A woman sat on a bench with a grocery bag between her feet. Somewhere down the tunnel, metal groaned, and a warm wind pushed out before the train came into view. The train arrived with a hard scream of brakes that made my teeth hurt. The doors opened. I stepped inside without really looking around. There were only a few passengers in the carriage, scattered apart from one another like strangers in a waiting room. No one looked up. No one spoke. I dropped into a seat near the window and leaned my head back. The fluorescent lights inside the train hummed above me. The sound reminded me of the office, and for a moment, I felt like I had not left work at all. My whole body was heavy. My eyes burned. I watched the dark tunnel slide past the window, broken by flashes of light, cables, and old concrete. The movement of the train became soft and steady. The click of the tracks turned into a rhythm. I told myself I would only close my eyes for a minute. As I drifted into that thin place between sleeping and waking, I had the strange feeling that I had taken this exact train before. Not just the same metro line, not just the same late route, but this exact train, this exact seat. this exact night. It was a feeling of memory without a memory attached to it. I tried to place it, but my thoughts were already slipping. The hum of the lights grew deeper. The rocking of the carriage became slow and gentle. Then, the train jolted so hard that my head snapped back against the window. I woke with a gasp. For a second, I did not know where I was. My heart was pounding. My mouth was dry. The carriage was dark, except for one weak strip of light above the doors. I sat up and looked around. The train had stopped. At first, I thought we had reached a normal station, but something felt wrong right away. There was no sound, not the soft engine hum, not the hiss of the brakes, not the small noises of people shifting in their seats. The other passengers were gone. Every seat around me was empty. A paper cup rolled slowly across the floor and stopped against my shoe. I looked through the scratched window. Outside, the platform was dim and dirty. The tiles were old, cracked, and stained with something dark. A violet light flickered above a rusted sign hanging from the wall. The letters were hard to read at first because the light kept blinking, but then I saw them clearly. The sign said Ambience Station. I had never seen that station on the metro line. I knew every stop between the office and my apartment. There was no Ambience Station. There had never been a Ambience Station. The train doors opened. The sound they made was sharp and heavy, like a blade dropping. I should have stayed where I was. I should have waited for the doors to close again. I should have shouted for help or moved to another carriage. But I did none of those things. I stood up. I do not know why. That is one of the worst parts. It did not feel like a decision. It felt like something had placed a hand on my back and gently pushed me forward. I stepped out onto the platform. The moment my heel touched the floor, the doors slammed shut behind me. I spun around and grabbed at them, but they were already sealed. The train did not move. It did not pull away. It simply began to fade. The lights inside went soft, then dim, then thin as smoke. The metal shape of the carriage became darker and darker until I could see the platform tiles through it. Then it was gone. I was alone. The platform stretched into darkness on both sides. The air was cold and damp. It smelled of rust, dust, and old electricity. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, one drop at a time, too slow and too loud. The walls were covered in old white tiles, but many of them had fallen away, leaving black gaps behind them. There were benches, but they were broken. There were posters, but the paper had curled and rotted until the faces on them looked melted. I grabbed my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up for half a second. Battery, 5%. I stared at it in disbelief. It had been at 38% when I left the office. I watched as the number changed to 4%, then 3%. It was not dropping like a normal battery. It was draining too fast, as if something in the station was pulling the life out of it. I fumbled for my power bank and plugged it in with shaking hands. The charging symbol appeared for 1 second. The battery jumped back to 5%. Then the whole screen turned a bruised purple, filled with thick lines of static. The phone buzzed in my hand like an insect. Then it went black. The power bank was ice cold. I held it against my palm and almost dropped it. It felt like it had been left outside in snow. My breath came out in pale clouds, though I was underground. I put the dead phone back in my pocket and forced myself to breathe. Above me, a clock hung from a rusted bracket. It was round and old with a cracked glass face. At first I thought it was broken, but then I noticed the second hand was moving. Only the numbers on the clock were wrong. They were arranged backward, and the hand moved from 12 to 11, then 10, then 9. It was counting in the wrong way. I backed away from it, and my shoulder hit a pillar. Something small fluttered beside my face. I turned and saw a Polaroid photo pinned to the concrete with a bent nail. My body went still. The photo showed Clara, my daughter. She was wearing her pink frock, the one with tiny white flowers near the bottom, the same dress she had worn on that last Saturday at the park. Her hair was tied back with a ribbon. She was smiling at whoever had taken the picture. The background was blurry, but I knew that dress. I knew that smile. I knew the little tilt of her head. My fingers shook as I touched the edge of the photograph. It was not old, it was clean. The surface was smooth and fresh. The lights above the platform suddenly burst one after another. Glass rained down and shattered on the floor. I covered my head and stumbled back. The station was thrown into darkness, then into a weak red pulse from emergency lamps along the wall. Light, dark, light, dark. In that broken, flashing light, I saw her. Clara stood about 10 feet away from me, her back turned. She was small, just as she had been. Her pink frock hung loose around her knees. Her hair ribbon moved slightly, though there was no wind. My chest folded in on itself. "Clara?" I said. My voice came out broken and small. She did not turn around. Then I heard her voice, "Papa." But it did not come from the girl standing in front of me. It came from everywhere at once. It came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the cracked tiles beneath my feet. It moved through the air and into my bones. "Clara," I said again. I took one step forward, then another. "Baby, is that you?" The smell hit me before I reached her. Iron, burnt rubber, hot metal. My knees almost gave out. It was the smell from the accident. I had smelled it every night in my dreams since that day. The smell of crushed car metal, the smell of blood, the smell of the road after the rain. I tried to cover my nose, but it was already inside me. It pulled the memory open. And then, Clara was gone. My wife stood in her place. Her clothes were torn. Her hair hung in wet strands across her face. Her skin was bruised dark in places where no living person should be bruised. Blood marked one side of her mouth, but her lips did not move. Her eyes were the worst part. They were empty. Not blind, not closed, just empty, like two dark holes looking straight through me. I could not move. I wanted to say her name, but my throat locked. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. I had said those words 1,000 times in the apartment, in the shower, in bed at 3 in the morning, but now that she was in front of me, I could not make a sound. Her mouth stayed still. The words appeared inside my head. "You couldn't save us." They did not sound like a voice. They felt like a wire snapping inside my skull. The words shook through me so hard that I cried out and fell back against the pillar. "You couldn't save us." "No," I whispered. I tried, but the station did not care. My wife took one slow step toward me. The emergency lights flashed red across her face. For one terrible second, I saw the accident again. Headlights coming too fast, rain on the windshield. Clara laughing in the back seat seconds before the impact, my wife turning her head toward me. I ran. I ran without knowing where I was going. My shoes slapped against the wet floor. The platform became a corridor. The corridor bent sharply to the left, then the right, then back in a way that made no sense. The walls were white tile, but the tiles seemed to curve and twist as I passed them, as if the tunnel was folding in on itself. I looked back once and saw only darkness behind me. But I could hear footsteps, slow at first, then faster. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. I passed the same broken vending machine 3 times. I passed a poster for a movie that had never existed. I passed the bench with my office bag sitting on it, even though I had left the bag on the train. I did not stop. At the end of the corridor, I saw a door with the word control painted on it in peeling black letters. I slammed into it with my shoulder. It opened. Inside was a room filled with old monitors. They sat in rows on metal desks, thick glass screens glowing with a thick green light. The air was warmer there, but not better. It smelled like dust burning on wires. The screens hummed together, a low sound that made my teeth ache. Every monitor showed me. One showed me running down the corridor, mouth open, eyes wide with fear. Another showed me standing on the platform, touching Clara's photograph. Another showed me sitting on the train before I had woken up. Another showed me in my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark. Another showed me at the crash site, kneeling in the rain, screaming with blood on my hands. I turned in a slow circle, trying not to look, but there was nowhere else to look. Every screen held a piece of me. Every screen showed a moment I wanted to forget. Then, the center monitor changed. It showed the inside of the train. It showed me asleep against the window. Not a memory, not a recording from before. It looked live. My chest rose and fell. My head leaned to one side. My face was calm. Peaceful even, I was still wearing the same shirt, the same coat. My phone was still in my hand. No, I said. My voice sounded far away. I'm here. I'm awake. The monitor flickered. The sleeping version of me did not move. Behind him, at the far end of the carriage, the lights began to go out one by one. Something stepped out of the darkness. At first, it was only a shape. Tall, bent, too thin in the wrong places. It moved low and fast, like a hungry animal, but it had the outline of a person. Its head tilted toward my sleeping body. I tried to scream at the screen. I tried to warn myself. I slammed my palms against the glass. Wake up, I shouted. Wake up. No sound came from my mouth. My lips moved, but the room swallowed everything. The dark shape rushed down the carriage toward my sleeping body. The monitors all went black at once. A voice said, "Hey, wake up." Last stop, I bolted upright with a sound I still feel ashamed of. A transit officer stood over me, tapping his nightstick against the seat. The train was bright, normal bright, not violet, not red. There were people around me again. A man was talking on his phone near the doors. Someone's headphones leaked music. A woman held a sleeping child against her shoulder. The train hummed. The brakes hissed. Everything was ordinary. The officer looked annoyed, but not surprised. "Nightmare?" he asked. I wiped my face. My skin was cold and wet. My shirt was soaked through with sweat. I don't know, I said. He glanced at his watch. That was when my stomach dropped. The watch had a cracked face. A thin line ran across the glass from the top left to the bottom right. It was my watch. Not exactly my watch, maybe, but it looked identical to the one I had lost in the crash. The one my wife had bought me for our anniversary. The one that had stopped at the moment of impact. I had searched for it later among the things returned to me from the hospital and the police, but it had never been found. The officer saw me staring. "What?" he said. I shook my head and stood too quickly. My legs almost gave out. I pushed past him and stumbled toward the doors. They opened onto a normal platform. Real lights, real signs, real people moving toward the stairs. Just a dream, I told myself. A terrible dream. A grief dream. That was all. I walked off the train, breathing hard, trying not to look back. My hands would not stop shaking. The platform smelled like oil and damp concrete, but not blood, not burnt rubber. I kept moving with the crowd. I needed air. I needed the street. I needed to stand under the real sky and prove to myself that I was still in the city I knew. Then I reached into my pocket for my keys. My fingers touched cardstock. I stopped walking. There was a train ticket in my pocket. I pulled it out slowly. It was old-fashioned, the kind of paper ticket the metro system had not used in years. The edges were damp. The ink was dark and uneven. There was no destination printed on it. That line was blank. The date line was not blank. October 14th, the date of the accident. My hands went numb. Around me, the sound of the crowd began to fade. At first, I thought I was going to faint. The voices became softer. The footsteps became distant. The warm air from the tunnel turned cold. I looked up. The people were gone. The platform was empty. The normal station sign above me flickered once, twice, and then changed. The white light turned violet. The letters shifted and blurred like something moving underwater. Ambience station. I could not breathe. Something drifted down from above and landed at my feet. A photograph. I already knew what it was before I picked it up. Clara in her pink frock, smiling, her ribbon bright in her hair. The same photo that had been pinned to the pillar. I turned it over with stiff fingers. There was writing on the back. The ink was fresh and wet, so wet that it shone in the violet light. Platform 3, 12:17 a.m. My dead phone buzzed once in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. The screen lit up, purple around the edges. Battery, 1%. Then, from somewhere behind me, soft and close, I heard the voice again. Papa. Every part of me wanted to run. Every part of me wanted to turn around. I stood there, trapped between both fears, holding my dead phone in one hand and my daughter's photograph in the other. Slowly, I turned. The lights did not flicker this time. They simply stopped existing. Everything went black. I do not remember getting home. I do not remember leaving the station. I woke up on my apartment floor just before sunrise, still wearing my work clothes, with dried blood under my fingernails and dust on my shoes. My phone was beside me, dead and cold. The power bank was cracked down the middle. The ticket was still in my pocket. The photograph was still in my hand. I have searched all morning. There is no Ambience station on the metro map. There is no record of a closed station by that name, no news article, no city page, nothing. But when I close my eyes, I can still see the violet light. I can still hear the clock counting backward. I can still smell burnt rubber and iron. And the worst part is this. The back of the photograph has changed. The message no longer says Platform 3, 12:17 a.m. Now it says, tonight. Story 2. I am a 24-year-old woman, and 3 days ago I came to stay with my 82-year-old grandmother. I did not come because I wanted a quiet winter break. I did not come because I missed the old house in the woods. I came because my mother sent me here. She said Grandma should not be alone, not so soon after losing Grandpa. He had only been dead for 2 weeks, and my mother kept saying the same thing over and over on the phone. She needs someone there, just for a while. She won't ask for help, but she needs it. I understood that. Grandma had always been proud. She hated being treated like she was weak, even when her hands shook from arthritis, even when her knees locked up and made every step painful. She still tried to do everything herself. She would rather struggle for an hour than let someone carry a plate for her. So I packed my car, left the city, and drove out to the old family house on December 17th. The drive was worse than I expected. The roads were narrow and almost hidden under thick snow. The trees pressed in on both sides, tall and black against the gray winter sky. By the time I reached the last road, my tires were sliding more than rolling. My car groaned as it crawled up the hill, like it was begging me to turn around. The house sat at the end of the road, completely alone. It was built from thick, dark logs, the kind of house that looked strong enough to survive anything. It had 2 floors, a steep roof covered in snow, and small windows that reflected the pale sky like blind eyes. Behind it, a little way across the yard, stood the outhouse where the boiler and electrics were kept. Grandpa had built most of it himself years ago. He was always proud of that place. When I parked, the engine clicked and hissed in the cold. I sat there for a moment with my hands still on the wheel. The house looked the same as it had when I was a child, but it felt different now. Empty, heavy, like grief had settled into the logs and frozen there. Grandma was waiting inside. She did not hug me when I came in. She just gave me a tired smile and said, "You made it." Then, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. The inside of the house was warm, but not comfortable. It smelled like old wood, dust, medicine, and the faint, sour smell of someone who had stopped caring about cleaning. There were cups beside her chair, blankets on the floor, unopened letters on the table, and ashes spilling from the fireplace. I could tell she had tried to keep up with things after Grandpa died, but her body had not let her. I spent the rest of that first day cleaning and unpacking. I carried my bags upstairs to the small guest room, wiped down the kitchen counters, washed dishes, swept the floors, and gathered old newspapers from beside the fireplace. Grandma sat in her chair near the television and watched me. She barely said a word. Sometimes I would glance at her and catch her looking at her hands. They were bent and swollen from arthritis, resting uselessly in her lap. I knew what she was thinking. I knew she felt helpless, worse than helpless, worthless. That hurt me more than the silence. I wanted to tell her she was not a burden. I wanted to sit beside her and hold her hand. I wanted to say that losing Grandpa did not mean she had to disappear too. But I knew Grandma. If I tried to comfort her too much, she would pull away. She wanted to keep as much independence as her age and pain would allow. She wanted to feel like she still had control over something. So I cleaned quietly and pretended not to notice the tears in her eyes. Later that night, after I went upstairs, I heard her crying. At first, I thought it was the wind. The house made a lot of sounds at night. The logs creaked, the windows rattled, and the roof groaned under the weight of snow. But then I heard her voice. She was downstairs, talking to herself. No, not to herself. To Grandpa. I stood at the top of the stairs in the dark, holding the banister. The living room lamp was still on, and I could see her shadow moving on the wall. Her words were slow and slurred. She had been drinking. There was a bottle on the side table beside her chair, and every few minutes I heard glass tap against glass. "You said you wouldn't leave me first," she whispered. "You promised." Then she cried harder. I wanted so badly to go down to her. I even took one step. But then she said, "Don't look at me like that." And my whole body went cold. There was nobody else in the room. I stayed on the stairs for several minutes, listening to her mumble and drink until her voice faded. Eventually, the house went quiet. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep much. The next morning was December 18th. The day started normally enough. I made tea. Grandma complained that I put too much milk in hers. That actually made me feel better because it sounded like her old self. I cleaned the upstairs bathroom, changed the sheets on her bed, and made soup for lunch. The power first flickered out that afternoon. The television cut off in the middle of one of Grandma's soap operas. She cursed loudly from the living room, using words I had not heard from her since I was a teenager. "For God's sake," she snapped. "The power's gone. My show will be on soon." I checked the lights. Nothing. The fridge had stopped humming, too. Grandma did not ask me to fix it. She just stared at the dead television like it had personally betrayed her. I sighed, pulled on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and put on gloves. "I'll go check the electrics," I said. She gave a small grunt, which was probably the closest thing to thank you I was going to get. The cold hit me as soon as I opened the back door. It pushed into my face and down my throat, sharp enough to hurt. Snow crunched under my boots as I crossed the yard toward the outhouse. The sky had already started to darken, though it was not even evening yet. Out here, winter swallowed daylight fast. The outhouse was a squat wooden building with a metal roof and a heavy door that stuck in damp weather. I had to pull hard before it opened. The smell hit me first. It was sweet, sickly sweet, like rotten fruit mixed with meat left too long in the sun, even though nothing could rot in that freezing air. I covered my mouth with my scarf and stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the gray light coming through a small, dirty window. The boiler stood in the center like a huge iron tower. Pipes ran from it into the walls and floor. Behind it was the electric box, mounted on the wall where Grandpa had always kept it. Then I looked down. The wooden floor was covered with dead flies. There were thousands of them, maybe more. They lay scattered everywhere, thickest near the boiler, their tiny black bodies piled in the cracks between the planks. Some were stuck together in dark clumps. Others looked crushed, as if something heavy had dragged itself over them. I told myself the boiler room had probably attracted them somehow. Maybe something had died in the wall. Maybe the heat had woken them from somewhere. I did not want to think too hard about it. I stepped carefully through the dead insects and went behind the boiler. When I opened the electric box, I saw that several switches had tripped. But that was not what bothered me. The switches were coated in slime. It was clear and thick, like spit or melted jelly. It clung to the plastic and stretched when I touched it with my gloved finger. I pulled my hand back quickly, disgusted. For a moment I just stared at it, feeling that strange fear you get when something small is wrong but your mind has not yet figured out why. Then I forced myself to move. I was wearing gloves, so I flicked the switches back on. The boiler gave a deep thud, and somewhere inside the house I saw lights glow in the window. I shut the box, backed out of the room, and closed the outhouse door behind me. When I got back inside, Grandma's television was working again. She did not ask what had happened. I did not tell her about the smell, the flies, or the slime. I did not want to upset her, and I did not want to sound ridiculous. That night was restless. I lay in bed listening to the sounds outside. At first it was just wind, but after a while I heard animals. At least I thought they were animals. Something was moving around the house, stepping through the snow, scratching at bark, calling from the trees. The cries were strange, too sharp to be foxes, too low to be birds. Sometimes they sounded like dogs whining. Sometimes they sounded like children laughing far away. I kept telling myself it was wildlife. We were deep in the woods. There were foxes, deer, owls, raccoons, and all kinds of things out there. Sounds carried strangely in the cold. Still, I did not sleep well. Now it is December 19th, and I am writing this because I do not know what else to do. The power went out early this morning. This time it did not flicker first. It just died. The whole house fell into silence. The lights went black. The heater stopped. The refrigerator clicked off. Even Grandma's television disappeared into a blank, dark screen. Within an hour, the cold started creeping in. It came through the walls and under the doors. It slipped across the floor and climbed into my bones. I wrapped Grandma in 2 blankets, then 3. Her face looked pale and thin, and I could hear her teeth clicking together. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her cup. "Fix it," she said, but her voice had no strength. "I'm going," I told her. I did not want to go back to the outhouse, not after the smell and the flies. But Grandma was 82 years old, and the temperature was dropping fast. The house was too isolated for help to arrive quickly. My phone signal was weak at the best of times, and the snow outside had grown deeper overnight. So I put on my coat again. I added another sweater, 2 pairs of socks, and my gloves. Before I went outside, I picked up the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The yard looked different in the daylight. The snow was untouched around most of the house, but near the outhouse there were marks, not footprints exactly, more like long, uneven smears. Something had dragged through the snow from the tree line to the door, then back again. The marks were wide and messy, with dark spots frozen into them. I stood there for a few seconds, staring. Then Grandma coughed inside the house, and I forced myself to keep moving. The outhouse door opened easier this time. The smell was worse. It rolled out at me like warm breath. Sweet, rotten, wet. I gagged and turned my face away. My flashlight beam shook in my hand as I stepped inside. The dead flies were still there, but now they floated. The wooden floor was covered in a layer of liquid. It was not deep, maybe only an inch or two, but it spread across the planks from wall to wall. It bubbled and gurgled softly, as if something underneath the floor was breathing through it. At first I thought the boiler had leaked. That was the only explanation that made sense. Maybe some pipe had burst. Maybe the heating system had failed and flooded the room. But the liquid was not water. It was thick and dark in places, pale and cloudy in others. It moved even when I stood still. Small bubbles rose and popped, letting out little bursts of that sweet, dead smell. I should have left right then. I should have gone back inside, grabbed Grandma, somehow gotten her into the car, and driven until the car died in the snow. But I did not. I told myself I had to turn the power back on. I told myself Grandma would freeze if I did not. I told myself all kinds of brave and stupid things because fear is easier to ignore when someone else depends on you. I stepped into the liquid. It made a soft sucking sound around my boots. The electric box was behind the boiler, same as before. I moved carefully, trying not to slip. The room felt warmer than it should have, and the boiler was silent. No hum, no heat moving through the pipes, just the wet bubbling from the floor. When I reached the box, the switches were down again. This time there was more slime. It coated the box, the wall around it, and the floor beneath it. Long strings of it hung from the metal door. I could see things inside the slime. Tiny black legs, pieces of wings, something that looked like hair. My stomach twisted. I flicked the switches back up as fast as I could, wiped my glove on my coat without thinking, and hurried out of there. The lights came back on in the house. For a while, I convinced myself that was the end of it. We had dinner early because the dark came so fast. I made canned soup and toast. Grandma ate very little. She kept looking toward the window above the sink. "What is it?" I asked. She did not answer at first. Then she said, "He always checked the boiler at night." I stopped moving. "Grandpa?" She nodded slowly. "Every night?" I asked. "Every night in winter," she said. He said the house talked to him through the pipes. I tried to smile, but it did not feel real. "That sounds like Grandpa." She looked at me then, and for a second her eyes were clear and sharp. "No," she said. It wasn't a joke. After that, she would not say anything else. Night fell deep and heavy around the house. The windows turned black. The trees outside disappeared. There was no moon, or if there was, the clouds hid it. We were alone in a little square of light in the middle of miles of frozen woods. Then the lights started switching on and off. At first, I thought the power was failing again. The lamps blinked. The kitchen light flashed. The television turned off, then on, then off again. But after a minute, I noticed the pattern. Every 10 seconds. On, off, exactly every 10 seconds. Grandma sat frozen in her chair, her mouth open a little. The flashing light made her face look like it belonged to a dead woman. I stood in the middle of the living room and counted under my breath. 10 seconds. The lights went off. 10 seconds. They came back on. That was when I knew it was not a normal electrical problem. Something was doing it. Something was at the electric box, flipping the switches like it wanted our attention. I went to the kitchen and took the biggest knife from the drawer. Grandma saw it and grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't," she whispered. I looked down at her hand. Her fingers were cold and stiff, but she held on hard. "I have to," I said. "We can't stay like this. Don't go out there, Grandma. What is happening?" Her eyes filled with tears. The lights went out again, and in the dark she whispered, "He came back wrong." The lights came on. I stared at her, but she looked away. "What does that mean?" She shook her head. "I told him not to go near it after he died." That made no sense. None of it made sense. I thought grief had broken something in her. I thought maybe she had been drinking again, or maybe the shock of Grandpa's death had confused her mind. Then the lights went off again, and from outside the house came a sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the back door. Not scratching, not knocking, tapping, slow and patient, like someone using one fingernail on the wood. Grandma began to cry. I pulled my sleeve free, held the knife tight, and went to the door. The tapping stopped before I reached it. I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The yard was dark except for the flashing light from the house windows. Every time the lights came on, the snow glowed white. Every time they went off, the whole world vanished. I crossed to the outhouse with the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The door was already open. I knew I had closed it earlier. I knew I had. But it stood open now, just a black rectangle in the side of the little building. The smell was so strong that my eyes watered before I even stepped inside. I raised the flashlight. At first, I saw only the boiler. Then the beam moved past it, toward the electric box. Something was standing there. It was a skeleton, but not clean like bones in a museum. It was covered in a thin, flaking layer of old flesh, as if the body had rotted and dried, then been soaked again in slime. Pieces of skin hung from its arms in wet strips. Dark gunk clung to its ribs. Its back was bent, and its head tilted slightly to one side. It was facing the electric box. One bony hand rested on the switches. I could not move. The thing did not turn around. That was the only reason I am still alive, I think. It stayed with its back to me, slowly touching the switches with fingers that were too long and too thin. Click, the lights in the house went out. 10 seconds passed. Click, they came back on. My breath shook so hard that the flashlight beam danced across the walls. I could see more dead flies stuck to the thing's back. I could see gray hair pasted to its skull. I could see a torn piece of cloth hanging from one shoulder. It looked like the shirt Grandpa had been buried in. I made a sound. I did not mean to. It was small, barely more than a breath. But the thing heard me. Its head twitched. I turned and ran. I slipped in the liquid and almost fell, but somehow I caught myself on the doorframe. The knife dropped into the snow. I did not stop for it. I ran across the yard with my chest burning and my legs almost useless from fear. When I reached the house, I slammed the back door shut and locked it. "Grandma?" I called. No answer. The lights were still flashing. I ran into the living room. Her chair was empty. The blankets were on the floor. For a moment, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. Grandma could not walk without help. On bad days, she could not even stand from the chair unless I lifted her. She could not have gotten up, crossed the room, and gone somewhere silently while I was outside. She could not have done it. But she was gone. I searched the downstairs first. Kitchen, bathroom, pantry, front hall. Nothing. I checked the stairs, thinking maybe she had tried to climb them, but there were no marks in the dust, no sound from above. "Grandma," I shouted again. The house answered with silence. Then the lights stopped flashing. Everything went dark. Not the normal dark of a room at night. This was complete, heavy, the kind of dark that feels like it has weight. The heater died again. The television clicked. The refrigerator stopped. I stood in the living room with my hands shaking, listening to the sudden stillness. Outside, something moved through the snow. Slowly, dragging, I backed away from the window. Then I heard Grandma's voice. It came from outside, near the back door. "Sweetheart," she called softly. "Open the door." I almost did. "God help me." I almost did. Her voice sounded weak and cold and scared. It sounded exactly like her. My hand was already reaching for the lock when I remembered what she had said. He came back wrong. I stepped back. "Grandma?" I whispered. "Open the door," she said again. But this time, behind her voice, I heard another voice. Grandpa. It was low and rough, like it was speaking through a throat full of mud. "Let us in." My blood turned cold. I moved away from the door and grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter. No signal. Of course there was no signal. The little bars at the top of the screen were empty. I tried calling emergency services anyway, but the call failed. The tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it was not only at the back door. It came from the windows, too. Tap, tap, tap. From the kitchen window, from the living room window, from upstairs. I stood in the middle of the house, turning in circles, while my grandparents' voices called my name from every side. Sometimes it was Grandma, crying and begging me to help her. Sometimes it was Grandpa, telling me everything was all right. Sometimes they spoke together. "Come outside, open the door, we're cold, we need you." The voices are still going as I write this. I have locked myself in the downstairs bathroom because it has no window. I pushed a chair under the door handle, though I know that will not matter if whatever is out there really wants to come in. My phone has 8% battery left. There is still no signal. The house is so cold now that my fingers hurt when I type. A few minutes ago, the tapping stopped. That was worse. Now I can hear something inside the walls. It moves through the pipes. It makes a wet sliding sound, slow and careful, like something crawling through the bones of the house. Every now and then, the bathroom light flickers, even though the power is supposed to be dead. When it flickers, I see liquid seeping under the door. It is the same liquid from the outhouse, thick, dark, bubbling softly. It smells sweet, like rot and sugar. Grandma's voice just called my name from the hallway. She is on the other side of the bathroom door. At least her voice is. She says she is sorry. She says Grandpa was lonely. She says he needed someone to keep him warm. She says the house has always needed someone in winter. Now Grandpa is speaking too. He says I should not be afraid. He says family stays together. The liquid is spreading across the floor. It has touched my shoes. Something in it is moving. I do not know what happened to my grandmother. I do not know if she is dead or if she has become part of whatever came back wearing Grandpa's bones. I only know she could not have left that chair by herself. I know I did not see anyone take her. I know the thing in the outhouse had my grandfather's clothes and my grandfather's hair and my grandfather's patient, awful way of waiting. And now it has both of their voices. The door handle is turning. It is moving slowly, left and right, like someone is learning how hands work. Grandma is whispering through the crack under the door. Please, sweetheart, don't make us wait. The light just flickered again. For 1 second, I saw a shape bending down outside the bathroom door. It was too thin, too tall. Its face was pressed close to the floor, trying to look in through the gap. It had Grandma's eyes. It had Grandpa's smile. And it said my name in both of their voices at once. I think I am going to join them soon. Story 3. My Aunt Liza died last month. She was only 47 years old, which still feels too young to say out loud. When someone older dies, people sometimes know what to say. They talk about a long life, about memories, about peace. But when someone dies at 47, there is no easy line that makes it feel better. There is only the shock of it and the strange empty space they leave behind. The official cause of death was ruled as an accidental overdose. That word hit me harder than I expected. Accidental, overdose. Two words that sound cold and simple on paper, but they carry a whole life of pain inside them. I know because I have fought my own battles with addiction. I know what it means to be close to the edge and not even realize how close you are. I know what it means to survive something that could have easily taken you. So when I heard what happened to Aunt Liza, it felt personal in a way I could not explain. We had not been as close in the last few years as we used to be. Life had pulled us in different directions, and Liza had always been the kind of person who disappeared when she was struggling. But she was still family. She still mattered. And even though I kept telling myself that I had made peace with her death, there were moments when grief would hit me out of nowhere. I would be washing a cup, locking my door, or sitting in traffic. And suddenly, I would think of her voice or her laugh, and my chest would tighten. I think that is one of the biggest reasons I agreed to take her parrot, Lulu. Lulu was a 14-year-old African gray parrot. Aunt Liza had owned her for years. Anyone who had ever been around Lulu knew she was not just a bird in a cage. She was loud, clever, dramatic, and way too confident for something that weighed less than a football. Liza loved that bird. She spoke to her like a person, fed her better than she fed herself sometimes, and always said Lulu was the only roommate she trusted. After the funeral, I overheard my Uncle Frank talking to my mother in the kitchen. He was tired, stressed, and clearly wanted to get rid of every reminder of Liza as quickly as possible. I heard him say he was going to take Lulu to an animal shelter. That did not sit right with me. I know shelters do their best, and I know not everyone can take in an animal after a death. But this felt wrong. Lulu had already lost the only home she knew. She had already lost Liza. The thought of her being handed over like an old chair or a box of unwanted dishes made my stomach turn. Pets are family. At least, that is how I have always seen it. So I stepped into the room and told Uncle Frank I would take her. He looked relieved, more than grateful. My mother gave me a look that said she was worried I was making a decision based on emotion, which I probably was. But I did not care. I could not save Liza. Maybe, in some small way, I could save something she loved. The first week with Lulu was hard. I had never owned a parrot before, and I quickly learned that they are not like quiet little decorations you keep in a corner. Lulu had opinions about everything. She did not like where I placed her cage at first. She did not like the sound of my coffee grinder. She did not like one of my throw pillows and screamed at it for 20 minutes straight until I moved it to another room. But more than anything, she was confused. She kept asking for Liza. Where's Liza? Where's Liza? The first time she said it, I froze. The second time, I cried. By the 10th time, I had to leave the room and sit on the bathroom floor until I could breathe normally again. She said it every morning when I took the cover off her cage. She said it when I came home from work. She said it when the apartment was quiet, like she was calling into the silence and waiting for Liza to answer. Where's Liza? Where's Liza? I did not know how much parrots could understand. I had read that African greys were intelligent, that they could remember words and connect some phrases to situations. But I had no idea if Lulu understood loss. I did not know if she was truly asking for Liza or just repeating a phrase she had heard many times before. Still, after several days of hearing it, I decided I had to try. One evening, Lulu was sitting on her perch, shifting from one foot to the other, watching me with those dark, clever eyes. "Where's Liza? Where's Liza?" she asked again. I took a slow breath and walked closer to the cage. My throat felt tight. I placed my hands on the metal bars and looked at her. "I'm sorry, Lulu," I said softly. "Liza is gone." The bird turned her head to the side, the way parrots do when they are listening carefully. "Liza is gone," she repeated. "Yes," I whispered. "Liza is gone." A tear rolled down my cheek. I did not expect saying it to hurt that much. I had already spoken about Liza's death with my mother, with police, with relatives at the funeral. But somehow, saying it to Lulu made it feel real in a different way. Like I was not just talking about a person who had died, I was telling a living creature that her whole world had disappeared. Lulu did not say anything else. She stared at me for a moment, then turned around on her perch and faced the wall. A few days after that, Lulu's behavior changed. At first, she became quieter. She did not ask for Liza as often. Every now and then, she would mutter, "Liza is gone," in a low voice that made my skin prickle. It sounded too much like a person trying to understand something sad. Then she started saying things I had never heard before. The first time it happened, I had just come home from work. It was a random Thursday, and I was exhausted. I stepped into the apartment, kicked the door shut behind me, and barely had time to put my purse down before Lulu spoke from the living room. "Where's your owner, huh?" I stopped moving. The words were clear, not mumbled, not mixed with another phrase. She said them like she had heard them many times. I stood there in the entryway, staring toward the living room. "Lulu?" I called. She made a soft clicking sound with her beak, but did not answer. A cold feeling moved through me for a second, but then I shook it off. Parrots have good memories. That was what I told myself. She could have heard that phrase years ago. Maybe a neighbor had said it. Maybe Uncle Frank had said it once while teasing Liza. Maybe it was from the TV. There were 100 normal explanations. Later, I would think back to that moment and wish I had taken it more seriously. The next strange thing did not happen for another week. By then, Lulu seemed to be settling in. She became more active and more comfortable in my apartment. She also became a complete nightmare for my houseplants. I had one fern I was especially proud of, a ridiculous little plant I had named Fernadette. Lulu hated Fernadette. Or maybe she loved her too much. Either way, Fernadette did not survive. Aside from the plant murder, things were improving. Lulu started talking more, a lot more. Her old question, "Where's Liza?" slowly became less common, and I got used to her normal phrases. When I came home from work, she would shout, "Hey there." When she wanted food, she would say, "Aw, is someone hungry?" And for reasons only Lulu understood, she loved yelling, "What you talking about, Willis?" at random points during the day. Sometimes she would say it while I was brushing my teeth. Sometimes while I was watching TV. Once, she screamed it at 3 in the morning, and I almost fell out of bed. She picked up new words all the time, too. That was just how she was. She repeated parts of commercials, sounds from my phone, and once, after I spent a full afternoon building a shelf and failing at it, she learned several words I was not proud of. So yes, Lulu could be a little shocking sometimes, but nothing prepared me for what I heard one morning. I woke up to the sound of her squawking from the next room. At first, I could not make out the words. My bedroom door was closed, and her voice came through the wall as a muffled burst of noise. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. It was early, the kind of early where the light is gray and weak, and your body refuses to believe morning has arrived. But Lulu kept going. After 10 straight minutes of her yelling, I finally gave up. I rolled out of bed, rubbed my eyes, and stepped into the hallway. That was when I heard her clearly. That bitch. I'll end her, I froze. The apartment felt suddenly too quiet around those words. Lulu said it again, in the same sharp tone. That bitch. I'll end her, a chill went down my back. Lulu had said rude things before. She had cursed. She had insulted the microwave once after hearing me do it. But this was different. This was not just a bad word or a silly phrase. It was violent. More than that, it had feeling in it. The way she said it made it sound like she was copying someone who had meant every word. I stood in the hallway, listening to my own heartbeat. Then I forced myself to walk into the living room. Lulu was inside her cage, feathers slightly puffed, black eyes fixed on me. I looked around the room before going near her. It was stupid, but some part of me expected to find a stranger hiding behind the couch, holding an axe or a knife, waiting to jump out. Of course, there was no one there. The room was empty, the windows were locked. The front door was locked too. I opened Lulu's cage and let her step onto my arm. "What's wrong, girl?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "Where did you hear that?" Lulu cocked her head. She studied me for a second, then said brightly, "Aw, is someone hungry?" I let out a shaky laugh, but it did not make me feel better. Thankfully, that new phrase did not last long. She only said it a handful of times over the next few days, and then it seemed to vanish from her little collection of words. I wanted to forget it. So I did what people do when something scares them, but they cannot explain it. I buried it under normal life. As more time passed, Lulu and I found a routine. I talked to her in the mornings. I gave her fresh water and food. I learned which treats she liked and which ones she threw on the floor like she was offended I had even offered them. I started leaving music on for her while I was at work. At night, I covered her cage and told her good night, and sometimes she whispered, "Hey there," back to me in a sleepy voice. Eventually, I began leaving her cage open at night. She rarely came out after dark, and I wanted her to be able to get water or move around if she needed to. Aunt Liza had trained her well. Lulu could be loud and mischievous, but she was not messy unless a houseplant was involved. I trusted her. That was why I was so shocked when I woke up last week to Lulu screaming beside my bed. It was the middle of the night. I had been deeply asleep when a high-pitched scream tore me awake. I knew right away it was Lulu. Her voice was close, too close. She was not in the living room. She was right next to me, near my ear, flapping and shrieking like the apartment was on fire. "Hey there. Hey there." My eyes shot open. I sat up fast, my heart slamming in my chest. For one confused second, I could not understand where I was or why Lulu was in my bedroom. The room was dark except for a thin line of streetlight coming through the curtains. "Hey there! Hey there!" Lulu screamed again. My vision adjusted slowly. Then I saw why she was screaming. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. At first, my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. The shape was too still, too wrong. A dark figure sat at the foot of my bed, facing the wall, not moving at all. They wore a hoodie with the hood pulled up. Their back was slightly bent. Their hands rested near their lap. I could not breathe. The person did not react to Lulu's screaming. They did not jump. They did not turn quickly. They just sat there, silent and still, like they wanted me to wake up and see them. My body locked in place. Some people say they would fight in that situation. Some say they would run. I have learned that I do neither. When I am terrified, I freeze. My brain goes blank and my muscles stop listening to me. I sat there, upright in bed, unable to move, unable to speak, watching the stranger at the end of my mattress. Then the figure slowly turned toward me. Even in the darkness, I could see the mask. It was plain white, with a simple smiley face on the front. The face was almost childish. 2 black dots for eyes, a curved black smile. But there was nothing funny about it. The blankness of it made my stomach twist. It was not a monster face. It was worse because it looked cheerful. The figure reached into their hoodie pocket. My blood went cold. They pulled out a knife. Lulu screamed louder and launched herself at them. She flew at the intruder's face, clawing at the mask, beating her wings against the hood, pecking and scratching with everything she had. The person barely reacted. They moved with frightening calm. One hand came up, not even to fight Lulu off properly, just to block her enough to keep going. Their other hand held the knife. They leaned toward me and pressed the blade against my throat. A sharp sting cut through my skin. I felt something warm slide down my neck. Lulu kept screaming, "Hey there, hey there, hey there." I wanted to scream too, but nothing came out. My whole body shook, but I could not pull away. The blade was cold and steady against me. One wrong move and I knew it could be over. The intruder leaned close to my ear. Their voice was low and rough. "This is your only warning," they whispered. "Mess with us again and you're dead." Then they pulled back. Just like that, they stood up, slipped the knife back into their hoodie pocket, and walked out of my bedroom. Lulu kept attacking until they were gone. Then she flew back to the bed and landed beside me. Her screams turned into smaller, broken sounds. "Hey there," she whispered. "Hey there." For a few seconds, maybe longer, I could not move. I sat there with one hand pressed against my neck, feeling the wet line of blood under my fingers. My mind kept replaying the knife, the mask, the voice. I had thought I was going to die. I had truly believed that the next breath would be my last. When my body finally listened to me again, I got out of bed on shaking legs and locked my bedroom door. Then I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I waited for the police, I held Lulu against my chest and cried so hard I could barely speak. She did not fight me. She did not make a joke. She just stayed there, warm and trembling, pressed against me. The police came, but they found almost nothing. No clear fingerprints, no useful camera footage, no signs of forced entry that made sense. The lock on my front door was not broken. A window in the living room was slightly open, but I could not remember if I had left it that way. The officers asked me if I had enemies. They asked if I owed money. They asked if I had been threatened before. I had no answers. That was the worst part. I had no idea who would want to scare me like that. I had no idea what the warning meant. Mess with us again. What had I done? Who was this? Was it connected to Aunt Liza? Was it connected to her death? Had she been mixed up with someone dangerous? Had I taken something they wanted when I took Lulu? Or was it all some horrible mistake? The police told me they would increase patrols around the area. They told me to stay with a friend if I felt unsafe. They told me to call if anything else happened. But none of that made me feel safe. I could not sleep in that apartment after that. Every small sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like a person standing still in the dark. I kept checking the locks again and again until my hands hurt. Lulu became quiet too. Sometimes she would sit on top of her cage and stare toward the hallway for long stretches of time. I was already on a month-to-month lease, so I left as quickly as I could. I packed only what I needed at first. Clothes, important papers, my laptop, Lulu's cage, and whatever I could carry without falling apart. My mother helped me find another place across town. It was smaller and not perfect, but it had new locks, brighter halls, and neighbors who seemed normal. The move went smoothly, better than I expected. Lulu handled it well, too. At first, she was quiet and watched everything with suspicion. But after a few days, she started acting like herself again. She greeted me when I came home. She begged for food. She insulted the TV. I even bought a new houseplant and placed it high on a shelf where Lulu could not reach it. For the first time in weeks, I started to feel like maybe we were going to be okay. But there is one thing I cannot stop thinking about. The walls in this new apartment are thin. At night, when everything is quiet, sound carries in strange ways. I can hear pipes moving. I can hear someone's TV from upstairs. Sometimes I hear a neighbor coughing or walking across the floor. And sometimes, late at night, I hear Lulu speaking from the other room. She says the same thing every time. Not loudly. Not like she is greeting me. Softly. Carefully. Like she is repeating something she has heard in the dark. Hey there, Story 4. I need to write all of this down while I still can. I am starting to believe that the writing is the only thing that stays in place. Everything else slips. Faces slip. Names slip. Memories slip. People look at me like I am telling them about a dream I had after a fever, and they are only waiting for me to stop talking. His name is Danny. Or maybe his name was Danny. I do not know which word is right anymore. When I say is, people look uncomfortable, like I am refusing to accept something. When I say was, it feels like I am burying him myself. Both words feel wrong. Both words feel like a lie. It started in a way so small that I almost ignored it. At first, I told myself I was tired. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself phones glitch, apps lose things, people delete old messages, and memories are not as perfect as we think they are. We had a group chat. There were 6 of us in it, and that chat went back for years. It had stupid jokes, old arguments, drunk voice notes, birthday plans, photos of food, screenshots of bad dates, and pictures from places we had gone together. Last March, I opened it because I wanted to find a picture Danny had sent from the lake. It was one of my favorite photos of us. We were all younger in it, sunburned and loud, with towels around our shoulders and cheap beer in our hands. Danny was laughing in the middle of the picture, leaning into Petro, with the lake shining behind them. I scrolled and scrolled. I knew almost exactly where it should have been. I remembered the messages before it. I remembered Petro making a joke about Danny looking like he was about to fall into the water. I remembered someone sending a row of crying, laughing emojis. But the photo was gone. It had not been deleted. If a message is deleted in that app, it leaves a small notice behind. A little empty marker that says a message was removed. This was different. There was no marker. There was no gap in the chat. The messages moved around the missing place like nothing had ever been there. It was like someone had lifted a stone from a river, and the water had closed over the hole without making a sound. I wrote in the chat, "Hey, what happened to Danny's lake picture?" 3 people reacted with thumbs up, the lazy kind of response people give when they do not know what else to say. Nobody answered. Then, Petro replied. Who? At first, I thought he was messing with me. Petro and Danny had known each other for years. Petro had been to Danny's apartment so many times that he knew which kitchen drawer had the bottle opener and which window always stuck in summer. Petro had once slept on Danny's couch for 2 weeks after a fight with his girlfriend. So when he wrote who, I thought he was being a jerk. I sent back, Danny, don't be stupid. No one replied after that. That was when I began to notice the first pattern. If I did not say Danny's name, nobody else did. Not once. Not by accident. Not in passing. Not even when they should have. I tested it for a week. I did not mention him at all. I waited. I listened. I went to places where his name should have come up. I met Petro for coffee. I talked to his old co-workers. I walked past the bar where Danny used to order the same drink every Friday. I even spoke to the barista who knew his usual coffee order so well that she used to start making it before he reached the counter. No one said his name. It was not the silence people make around a dead person. I know what grief feels like. Grief fills a room. It presses on people. It makes them careful. They look away, then look back. They speak softly. They leave spaces where the missing person should be. This silence was not grief. It had no shape. It was clean and smooth. It felt like a field after it has been cut flat, with no sign that anything ever grew there. So I started saying his name. I said it on purpose. I said it to Petro. I said it to the barista. I said it to his old boss. I said it to his sister. I said it as if saying it enough times would make the world admit he had existed. That was when I learned something worse. Saying his name out loud did not bring him back. It made the erasing happen faster. I went to his apartment building because I needed something solid. Danny's name had to be on the lease. I knew it was there because I had helped him get that apartment. More than helped him. I had co-signed the lease. My own signature was on the paper. I remembered sitting beside him in the leasing office, both of us sweating because the air conditioning was broken, while Danny made jokes about how the pen was chained to the desk like it was dangerous. The building manager let me see the copy after I asked enough times and probably looked desperate enough. My name was there. My signature was there. The dates were there. The address was there. But the line where Danny's name should have been was strange. It was not empty, not completely. It was just lighter than the rest of the page, like someone had rubbed it with a soft eraser and stopped before the paper tore. I could still read it if I held the page toward the window and let the light hit it from the side. Daniel Mercer. There, faint, but there. My hands were shaking when I took a picture of it with my phone. I took 3 pictures, just to be safe. I thanked the manager and left as fast as I could. In the hallway, I checked the pictures, and his name was still visible. Pale, but readable. I felt a little better. Not safe, but better. I had proof. By the time I got home that night, the proof had changed. In the picture on my phone, the line was blank. Not rubbed out. Not blurry. Just blank. It looked like no one had ever written a name there at all. After that, I went to his mother's house. She had known me since I was 9 years old. Danny and I grew up together. His mother used to make us sandwiches after school. She used to call us the 2 disasters because we were always breaking something, losing something, or coming home covered in mud. I thought if anyone could not forget him, it would be her. A mother cannot forget her own son. That was what I told myself on the drive there. She invited me for dinner like she always did. Her kitchen smelled like garlic and roasted vegetables. The same old clock ticked above the stove. The same little ceramic ducks sat on the windowsill. For a while, everything felt so normal that I almost cried. Then she set the table. There were 4 of us who usually ate there when I visited, her brother, a neighbor who came by often, and me. But she set 5 plates. She put down the 5th plate without thinking, placed a fork beside it, straightened the napkin, and then stopped. She stared at it. She stared at that 5th place for a long time. Her face changed in a way I still cannot forget. She looked confused, but not the way a person looks when they make a small mistake. She looked like she had found a word on the tip of her tongue and could not remember how to say it. Her hand hovered over the plate. Her lips moved a little. For 1 second, I thought she was going to say his name. She did not. She picked up the plate and carried it back to the cabinet. Her hands were shaking. Then she turned around and smiled at me too brightly, like a light switched on in an empty room. That was when I understood something that made my stomach go cold. She was not simply forgetting him. Some part of her was fighting not to forget him. Some part of her still knew there should be another plate. But that part was losing, and the losing hurt her, and she did not even know why. I almost stopped then. I want that written down clearly. I almost let it go. I almost decided that maybe the kindest thing was to stop pulling at the wound. Everyone else seemed peaceful. Everyone else seemed fine. Maybe I was the broken one. Maybe I was the one holding on to something that had already left. But I had his voicemail. It was the last voicemail Danny had ever left me. I had kept it for a year. Every 30 days I saved it again so the phone company would not delete it. It was stupid, maybe, but I liked knowing it was there. Sometimes I played it when I missed him. His voice in it was casual and warm and a little rushed. He was calling about nothing important. He said he would tell me the rest later. He ended the way he always ended calls, with that soft, half-laughing anyway before hanging up. That night after dinner at his mother's house, I sat in my car and played the voicemail. The timer started. It counted upward. 1 second. 2 seconds. 10 seconds. 20. 41 seconds. The exact same length it had always been. But there was no voice. There was only silence. Clean, even silence. No breath. No background noise. No traffic. No laugh. No anyway. Just 41 seconds of nothing. And then the beep. That was when I understood another part of it. The proof was not disappearing. The proof was being emptied. The lease still existed. His place on it was just blank. The voicemail still played. It was just quiet now. The photos were still in my phone. I had 11 of them, and in every single one, something was wrong. Danny was gone from them. But the photos did not look normal. The people around him had not moved into new places. They had not closed the space. They were still turned toward where he used to be. In one picture from a birthday party, I was smiling at an empty chair. In another, his sister was holding up a glass toward a blank spot beside the couch. In the lake photo, the one I finally found hidden in an old backup folder, Petro was mid-laugh, leaning into a shoulder that was no longer there. His eyes were looking at nothing, full of happiness. His arm hung in the air, bent around someone the picture had forgotten. I think I know why I was different. I think I know why I remembered when everyone else did not. I was the one who introduced Danny to almost everyone in his life. I introduced him to Petro. I introduced him to Petro's wife. I helped him get the job where people now looked confused when I asked about him. I introduced him to the guy his sister later dated. Even people who became close to Danny had first met him through me. I was the root. I was the first copy. Everyone else knew him because I had carried him to them in some way. Whatever this thing was, it was working backward. It was deleting the branches first. The people who had known him through someone else forgot first. The records connected to them emptied out. The stories faded. The pictures changed. It was moving back up the chain toward the beginning. And I was the trunk. I was last. For days after I figured that out, I barely slept. I wrote down every memory I had of him. I wrote about the lake, his apartment, his laugh, the scar on his thumb, the way he hated mushrooms but always forgot and ordered food with mushrooms in it, the old brown jacket he wore even after the sleeve ripped, the dog he had as a kid, the sound he made when he was trying not to laugh in serious places. I filled pages and pages. I recorded myself saying his name. I printed photos. I wrote dates on the backs of them. I made copies of copies like that, could stop what was happening. But I knew paper would not be enough. The words could empty. The pictures could change. The recordings could go silent. I needed another person. Just one person. If one other person truly remembered him, not in that smooth, empty way, not as a word they repeated to make me feel better, but really remembered him, then I would not be alone. There would be two of us. Two people could hold a thing between them. Two people could fight. So last week I did the thing I had been too afraid to do. I went back to his mother. I brought everything with me. The lease, the blank photos, the silent voicemail, the notes I had written. I sat with her in the living room where Danny and I used to play video games on the floor when we were kids. She made tea. She asked if I was all right. I said no, and then I said his name. She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. A tiny break in her face. I kept talking. I told her about Danny as a boy. I told her about the dog he loved, the one that used to sleep by his bedroom door. I told her about the time he cut his thumb on a broken glass and lied that it did not hurt even while his eyes were watering. I told her about how he said anyway before ending every phone call. I told her about his laugh, not the polite laugh he used with strangers, but the real one that started low and got louder until everyone around him laughed too. At first, she looked at me with that same smooth face. Then her eyes began to move, searching the room. She looked toward the hallway. She looked toward the stairs. She looked at an old family photo on the shelf. Her hands tightened around her cup. I talked for 2 hours. My throat hurt. My mouth went dry. I kept going because I could see something happening. It was like watching someone trapped under ice, far below the surface, trying to find the place where the ice was thin enough to break. Her face changed again and again. Fear, confusion, pain, almost recognition. Then nothing. Then pain again. At 11:40 that night, something in her eyes finally caught. It was small, like a match lighting in a dark room. She put her hand over her mouth. Her whole body shook once. Then she whispered, "Danny." I froze. She said it again, louder. "Danny, oh my God. Danny, how could I?" And then I felt it. The moment she said his name, I felt warmth begin behind my chest. It started deep, behind the bone, behind the place where fear had been sitting for weeks. It spread outward slowly. For one stupid, beautiful second, I thought it was relief. I thought it was joy. I thought we had done it. She remembered. I was not alone. The world had not fully won. But it was not joy. The next morning, I called her house. A man answered. It was her brother. His voice sounded tired and frightened. He said she had some kind of episode during the night. He said she was confused. He said she kept asking about a son she never had. He said the doctors were running tests. I drove over so fast I barely remember the road. She was sitting in the front room with a blanket over her knees. Her eyes were open, but they looked far away. When I came in, she smiled at me politely, like I was a stranger from church or a neighbor she had met once. She did not know me. I said her name. I asked if she remembered me. She shook her head softly. Then I said Danny's name. Her face went smooth. It was the same face everyone else gave me now. Calm, empty, polite, like I had asked about someone from a story she had never read. That was when I understood the worst part. It had never been a forgetting. The forgetting was the cure. Everyone who forgot Danny was fine. Better than fine, maybe. They were lighter. They smiled more easily. They moved through their days without the heavy thing I carried in my chest. They had the peace of people who had finally thrown away a box they had been dragging from apartment to apartment for 10 years without ever opening it. Remembering was the sickness. I was not the last person protecting him. I was the first person infected. I was patient zero, and I had given it to his mother. I had sat in her living room and forced the memory back into her, because I was lonely and scared and angry at the world for taking my friend. I made her remember the son her own mind had been trying to bury for her own safety. She had only wanted to set the right number of plates. She had only wanted to make dinner. And I gave her Danny back long enough for him to take her with him. Now I can feel it spreading. It started with her brother. He held her hand in the hospital and asked her who Danny was. He called me that morning because she kept saying the name. He asked if I knew anything about a son. He said there was no son in the family. He sounded certain. Then, a few hours later, he texted again. The message said, "Did he have dark hair?" Then another one. "Why do I remember a boy in the yard?" Then another. "Please call me." I did not call. I was afraid of what my voice would do. There is a Danny-shaped warmth moving through the people she touched. It came from me. I gave it to her on purpose. She gave it to her brother without knowing. Maybe he has already given it to a nurse, or a doctor, or a neighbor who asked too many kind questions. Maybe it spreads through touch. Maybe it spreads through love. Maybe it spreads when one person makes another person try to remember what the world has chosen to remove. Here is the part I have not told anyone. The warmth behind my chest never went away. It is still there now as I write this. It does not feel like sickness. That is what scares me most. I keep waiting for it to feel like dying. I keep waiting for pain, fever, fear, something sharp enough to prove this is wrong. But it feels good. It feels like the lake. Not the photo of the lake, not the memory written down in my shaking handwriting, but the real lake. Cold water around my legs. Sunlight on my face. Danny laughing beside me. Petro laughing too. All of us 19 years old and stupid and certain that no one we loved would ever really leave us. It feels like wet grass under bare feet, and music from a cheap speaker, and the kind of afternoon that makes you believe time is something soft. It feels like there is a door somewhere close by. Not a scary door. Not a dark one. A warm door. A door with light coming from the edges. And everyone I have ever loved is already on the other side of it. Not gone. Not dead. Just spread out into everything. Into afternoon light. Into the hum of the refrigerator. Into the reason the bus is always 2 minutes late when you need it. Into the empty chair no one notices. Into the fifth plate that a mother sets down before she remembers she has no reason to set it. And I am the only one still standing in the hallway, holding a lease, holding a phone, holding old pictures, insisting on names like names are what keep people real. I am starting to think being forgotten is not losing. I am starting to think it is the only club that ever mattered, and I am the last one outside it. I am going to stop saving the voicemail. For a year, I saved it every 30 days like I was keeping him alive, but there is nothing in it now. Just 41 seconds of silence and a beep. Maybe that silence is not empty. Maybe it is only quiet because I am still on the wrong side of it. Maybe if I stop holding on, I will finally hear what is underneath. If you are reading this and you do not remember anyone named Danny, that is good. That means it worked. That means you are safe. Close this page. Put your phone down. Go to your kitchen. Set the table for the people who are actually there, and do not wonder why your hand pauses over one extra plate. But if you reach the end of this and you feel something small start behind your chest, something warm and soft, like a pilot light turning on in a dark house, then I am sorry. You remembered him too. Anyway, story 5. I saw the garden again last night. It looked the same as it always looks. The gate stood in front of me, huge and rusted, so tall that I had to bend my head back to see where the bars ended. Even then, I could not see the top clearly. It seemed to rise into the red sky and disappear there, like it had no end. I never remember how I get to that place. I never remember walking toward it, or waking up there, or falling into it. There is never anything before the gate. No road behind me. No sound of footsteps. No memory of a bed, a room, or a life outside it. The gate is always the first thing I know. It feels like this is where I begin. The bars of the gate are not straight. They stretch upward in uneven lines, twisting in places, bending in others, as if they were not made by human hands. They do not look like they were forged in fire or hammered into shape. They look grown. They look like something pulled them out of the ground very slowly, inch by inch, while they fought to stay buried. At the bottom of each bar, the soil is swollen and cracked. The dirt there is dark and wet, almost black, and it rises around the metal like infected flesh around a wound. Rust covers every bar in long strips. But it does not look like normal rust. It does not dry and flake away like old metal left in the rain. It hangs there in peeling pieces, thick and soft-looking, like dead skin. Some places are split open in thin lines, and beneath those lines are darker layers. Those layers shine in the dull red light, wet and slick, like mucus. Every time I see it, a thought comes into my mind that I do not want. If I touched it, it would move. If I pressed my fingers against it, it would give way, soft and warm under my hand. I always keep my hands close to my sides. This is not a dream. At least I do not think it is. There is still a small part of me that tries to argue. That part tells me I must be sleeping. It tells me the garden is just a nightmare, something my mind made from fear and stress and too many nights without rest. It tells me no place like this can really exist. It tells me the gate, the sky, the smell, the impossible trees beyond the bars, all of it is only inside my head. But dreams do not smell like this. Dreams do not leave a taste on your tongue. The smell is always the first thing that makes me sure. It is not just the smell of death. It is not simple rot, like something dead in the woods, or old meat forgotten in the heat. It is sweeter than that. Too sweet, thick, heavy, and warm, like fruit left in the sun until it bursts open and turns black inside. The smell gets into my throat. It clings to the back of my mouth. Each breath brings more of it in, and no matter how hard I try to breathe through my nose or mouth, I cannot escape it. It feels like the air itself is rotting. And then there's the sky. The sky is not only red. Calling it red makes it sound too normal. It is not the bright red of fire, or blood, or sunset. It is flat and endless, a heavy crimson color that hangs over everything without light or warmth. There is no sun. There are no stars. There are no clouds moving across it. The sky just sits there, low and still, like a ceiling pressing down on the world. The longer I look at it, the more it seems to drain everything beneath it. The gate loses shape. The ground looks thin. The trees beyond the bars become shadows inside shadows. It feels as if the color is pulling the world apart very slowly, taking away the depth and weight of everything. Even my own hands look less real under that sky, pale and strange, like they belong to someone else. Beyond the gate is the garden, I call it a garden because I need a word for it. I need something simple to hold in my mind. But the word is wrong. A garden is supposed to have order. A garden has paths, borders, flowers, care, and someone who tends it. A garden has a beginning and an end. This place has none of that. This place is endless. It stretches farther than any forest, any desert, any sea. It spreads across every horizon until I cannot tell where the ground stops or where the red sky begins. I have never seen the whole of it, and I know I never could. Even from the gate, I can feel how large it is. It is not just big, it is too big. It feels like a world made from decay, a living place where everything is dying, but nothing ever becomes fully dead. Flowers rise in the distance, larger than skyscrapers. Their stems are thick and pale, covered in dark veins that pulse slowly, like weak hearts. Their petals open and close with a sick rhythm. They do not bloom like flowers in the real world. They unfold like flesh being pulled apart. From their centers, clouds of yellow-gray dust spill out and drift into the air. I know that dust must smell sweet and rotten, even from far away. I can feel it in my throat before it reaches me. There are trees bigger than mountains, bigger than anything that should be alive. Some of them twist upward until they disappear into the red sky. Their bark is not bark. It is cracked and stretched, like skin pulled over bone. In some places, the trunks split open, and inside them are deep red channels that pump dark liquid upward. The liquid moves in slow waves, like blood trying to climb. Roots cover the ground in tangled masses. Some roots are smooth and black. Some are white and hard like bone. Some are shaped almost like fingers, bent and reaching. They do not stay still. They shift slightly when I look away. They move in the corner of my eye, dragging themselves over stones, pushing through mud, wrapping around one another like snakes. There are rivers, too, but they do not run the way rivers should. They are swollen with black water, thick and slow. The surface shines like oil. Sometimes the rivers flow along the ground, cutting through the forest of roots and rotting flowers. Sometimes they rise upward into the air, pulling themselves into hanging vines that lead nowhere. Those vines dangle from the empty sky, dripping dark drops that fall for a long time before they hit the ground. Nothing in the garden seems separate from anything else. Roots become bones. Bones become branches. Branches crack open into flowers. Flowers grow eyes that do not see, or mouths that do not speak. The rivers feed the trees, but the trees also bleed into the rivers. The ground breathes. The air watches. Every part of the place seems tied to every other part, as if the whole garden is only one enormous living thing, wearing many shapes at once. And every night, I stand outside the gate. Every night until last night. Before last night, the gate had never opened. I had stood there more times than I can count. Sometimes I think it has been weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. Time does not feel the same there. I never know how long I stand in front of the gate before I wake up. I only know that I am always too afraid to touch it, and too afraid to turn away. But last night, something changed. At first, I heard a low sound from deep inside the garden. It rolled through the air slowly, like thunder from far away. It reminded me of storms from my hometown when I was younger, the kind that shook windows and made the lights flicker. But the sky above the garden did not change. There were no clouds, no wind, no lightning. The red sky stayed still and empty. The sound came again. This time, it was deeper. The ground under my feet trembled. The swollen dirt at the base of the gate began to shift. Wet cracks opened wider around the bars, and something dark moved beneath the soil. Then the metal screamed. The sound was sharp and terrible. It was the sound of old iron bending, but there was something else under it, too. A wet tearing sound. A sound like flesh being pulled away from bone. The bars of the gate began to open. They did not swing easily. They moved as if they had been sealed shut for 1,000 years. Rusty strips peeled away from them as they parted, falling to the ground in soft pieces. Some of those pieces twitched after they landed. One curled in on itself like a dying worm before sinking into the mud. The opening between the gates grew wider and wider, and beyond it I saw a path. It was made of cobblestones, old and uneven, twisting away into the garden. I had never seen the path before. I do not know if it had always been there, hidden behind the bars, or if the garden made it for me in that moment. The stones were dark, wet, and slick, with thin red moss growing between them. The path curved into the forest of roots, flowers, and trees, disappearing between the tall shapes like a tongue leading into a mouth. I should have run. I know that now. I knew it then, too. But I did not move backward. I stood there while the gate opened fully, and the smell of the garden rushed out toward me. It hit me like heat from an oven. Sweet rot filled my lungs. My eyes watered. My stomach twisted. I wanted to cough, but no sound came from my throat. Then I stepped forward. I do not remember deciding to do it. One moment I was outside the gate, frozen in terror. The next moment my foot was on the first stone of the path. The stone was cold through my shoe. Not cool, not damp, but deeply cold, like something pulled from the bottom of a grave. The moment I crossed the threshold, the garden went silent. Everything stopped. The flowers stopped pulsing. Their huge petals froze half open. The black rivers stopped moving. The hanging vines became still. The trees no longer throbbed with that dark red current. Even the small crawling roots on the ground went stiff. No breath, no drip, no whisper of movement. It felt as if the entire place had been waiting for me, not watching me by accident, not noticing me because I had entered. Waiting, the silence was worse than the sounds had been. It pressed against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat. Each beat seemed too loud. I took another step, and the sound of my shoe against the wet stone echoed through the garden. The echo traveled far, much farther than it should have, moving between the trees and roots until it became something almost like a voice. I wanted to turn around then. I looked back over my shoulder, expecting to see the gate still open behind me, but it was farther away than it should have been. I had taken only 2 steps, yet the gate looked distant, small, and half hidden in red mist. I could still see its rusted bars, but they were already closing, slowly, quietly, like a mouth shutting after swallowing. I tried to run back. My body did not obey. My legs kept moving forward along the path. I could feel myself walking, but it was like I was riding inside someone else's body. My thoughts screamed at me to stop, to turn, to fall to the ground and crawl backward if I had to. But my feet kept following the stones. The garden remained still around me. The flowers leaned over the path without moving. Their centers were dark holes, wet and deep, and from inside them came the faintest sound, like breathing through a clogged throat. The path twisted through roots as thick as houses. It passed under branches that looked like ribs. It crossed narrow bridges over black water. Once I looked down into one of the rivers and saw shapes beneath the surface. They were pale and long, drifting just under the black water. At first I thought they were branches. Then one of them turned slowly, and I saw a hand. Not a human hand exactly. Too long. Too many joints. It pressed against the surface from below, and the water bulged upward, but did not break. I looked away and kept walking. The path took me deeper. The red sky never changed, but the light seemed to fade anyway. The farther I walked, the less real the garden felt, not like a dream, but like a place that existed before reality had rules. The air became heavier. Each breath was harder. The smell of rot grew thicker until I could taste it as something sweet and wet on my tongue. I began to hear whispers. At first they were only sounds, small and soft, hidden in the stillness. A creak from a tree, a wet click from a flower, a low murmur from the roots. But soon the sounds joined together. They moved around me, behind me, above me, inside the walls of the enormous trunks. The whispers never became clear words, but I could feel meaning in them. They were not speaking to each other. They were speaking about me. I felt it the way you feel someone staring at your back in an empty room. The path rose over a hill of bone-white roots. From the top, I could see farther into the garden than before. It went on forever. Endless trees, endless flowers, rivers rising into the air, vines hanging down from nothing. And far beyond all of it, beyond the forest of veins and branches and black water, something stood. At first, I thought it was a mountain. It was enormous, a dark shape against the red sky. Its base disappeared into the garden, and its top rose higher than the tallest trees. It did not move. It had no clear outline. I could not tell where it began or ended. Then I thought it might be a tower, something built, something ancient, a structure that had stood there since before the garden grew around it. But the longer I stared, the less it looked like stone. Its sides were too uneven. Its shape was too alive. It seemed to lean slightly, not from weakness, but from attention. Then I understood it was something else. Something that was not a mountain and not a tower. Something alive. I could not see a face. I could not see eyes. It was too far away for that. But I knew it was watching me. I knew it with complete certainty. Its attention came toward me across the garden like a wave of pressure. It pressed against my skull. It pushed into my thoughts. It felt like a memory I had buried so deeply that I had forgotten it was ever mine. The worst part was not that it was strange. The worst part was that it felt familiar. I should not have known it. Nothing in me should have recognized that shape. But some old part of my mind knew it. Not by name, not by sight, but by fear. It was the fear of something older than language, older than childhood, older than being human. The garden began to breathe again, not all at once. Slowly, the flowers pulsed, the rivers shifted, the roots curled and relaxed, the trees throbbed with dark liquid. The whole world around me seemed to wake, and every part of it faced the distant shape. Then, the shape moved, only slightly. That was enough. The ground under the path gave a soft shudder. The stones beneath my feet shifted. A crack opened between two cobblestones, and from that crack a thin black root pushed out. It was small at first, no thicker than a thread. Then it grew longer. It moved across my shoe with slow, careful purpose. I tried to pull away. This time my body listened. I stumbled backward. The root snapped tight around my ankle. It was cold and wet. I kicked hard, and it broke with a soft pop. Thick black liquid splashed across the stone. The garden around me made a sound then, not loud, but full of hunger. The whispering rose. The flowers bent closer. The trees creaked. More roots pushed up between the stones. I ran. The path had changed. I knew it had. It twisted in ways it had not twisted before. The gate was nowhere to be seen. The red sky pressed lower. Roots broke through the stones behind me. I heard them sliding over the path, following me. I heard wet petals opening. I heard the black rivers begin to move faster. I ran until my chest burned. I ran until the sweet smell filled my lungs so completely that I thought I would choke on it. And behind me, far away and close at the same time, The huge shape watched. I felt its attention on me like a hand around the back of my neck. Then I woke up. I came awake in my bed with my mouth open, gasping like I had been drowning. My room was dark. The ceiling was above me. My blanket was tangled around my legs. For a few seconds, I was so thankful to be awake that I almost cried. I touched my face, my chest, my arms, just to prove I was back in my own body. My room looked almost normal. The curtains were closed. My desk was against the wall. My chair was where I had left it. My phone was on the nightstand. The small green light from the charger glowed in the corner. Everything was familiar. Everything was mine. But the smell was there. At first, I thought it was still in my nose from the dream. I sat up and swallowed, trying to clear my throat. But the taste of it stayed. Sweet, rotten, thick. I breathed through my mouth, and it got worse. I breathed through my nose, and it was worse there, too. The garden had followed me. I turned on the lamp. The light looked weak, almost yellow. It did not fill the room the way it should have. Shadows stayed in the corners. The air looked heavy, like dust was floating in it, though I could not see anything clearly. Then I saw the wall. At first, I thought it was a stain. There was a dark mark near the corner, just above the floor, where the wall meets the baseboard. It was small, maybe the size of my palm. The paint around it had bubbled and cracked. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for my tired mind to make sense of it. I told myself it was water damage, mold, a leak, anything normal. Then the wall moved. Not much, just a small pulse under the paint. The bubble stretched outward, then settled back. The crack in the center widened. Something black showed through from inside the wall. I got out of bed slowly. The floor felt cold under my feet. Too cold. The same grave cold feeling as the stones in the garden. I took one step toward the wall, then another. My hands were shaking. The smell grew stronger with every step. The mark was not on the wall. It was inside it. Something was pushing outward. The paint had split open like skin. Beneath it was a dark, wet wound filled with thin black roots. They crawled through the crack, slow and searching. Some were no thicker than hair. Others were thicker, twisting over each other as they pushed into my room. They did not move like plants. They moved like fingers, feeling for something in the dark. One of them touched the floor. It curled against the wood, testing it. Another root slipped out and reached toward me. I stepped back so fast I nearly fell. The root stopped. Then it lifted slightly, like it had sensed my movement. I wanted to scream, but I was afraid the sound would wake something else. I grabbed my notebook because I needed to write this down. I needed proof. I needed something that would still exist later, when my mind tried to lie to me and tell me none of this had happened. My hand shook so badly that the first words were almost unreadable. I wrote about the gate. I wrote about the red sky. I wrote about the garden opening for me. I wrote about the shape in the distance. And now I am writing this because I do not know what else to do. The smell is stronger now. The roots have spread across the corner of the room. They are still quiet, but not still. They move when I am not looking directly at them. Every time I glance down at the page, I hear soft scraping from the wall. When I look back, the crack is wider. There is something behind the wall. No, that is not right. There is something in the wall. The roots are not coming from outside my house. They are not breaking through from the yard or the ground. My room is on the second floor. There is nothing behind that wall except another room, and beyond that, the hallway. But I can hear space behind the crack. Not the small empty space inside a wall. A large space. A deep space. I hear wind moving through trees. I hear water, slow and black. I hear petals opening. The sound is faint, but it is getting clearer. A few minutes ago, I pressed my ear near the wall. I do not know why I did that. Maybe I wanted to prove I was wrong. Maybe I wanted to hear pipes, or mice, or the old settling noises houses make at night. Instead, I heard breathing. It was slow and deep. Not human, not close, but not far either. Then something whispered. I could not understand the words, if they were words at all, but I felt them inside my teeth. I felt them in the bones of my face. The whisper moved through me and left a thought behind. The gate opened once. It can open again. The roots are farther across the floor now. One of them has reached the leg of my desk. It is wrapping around the wood, moving upward inch by inch. Another is near my bed. It has found the blanket that hangs over the edge and is pulling at the fabric gently, like a child tugging at a sleeve. The wall is bulging. The crack is no longer small. It is spread upward in long black lines, branching like veins. The paint around it is wet. It shines in the lamplight. Something dark is pressing from the other side. The shape of it rises and falls, as if the wall itself is breathing with a lung hidden behind it. I keep looking at the door. It is only a few steps away. I should run. I should leave this room, leave this house, get into the street, find someone, anyone, and tell them what is happening. But I cannot make myself stand. Part of me is afraid that if I move, the roots will move faster. Another part of me is afraid that the door will not open. And the deepest part of me, the part that recognized the shape in the garden, already knows something worse. This is not starting. This has already started. Maybe the garden was never a dream. Maybe I was not visiting it. Maybe it was visiting me. Maybe every night, while I stood outside the gate, something on the other side was learning the shape of my mind, learning my room, learning my walls, learning how to come through. The smell is almost too strong to bear now. My eyes are watering. My throat burns. The roots are at my chair. I can hear the garden clearly. It is in the walls. The flowers are opening. The rivers are moving. And far away, beyond everything, something huge has turned its face toward me. I am going to stop writing now.